Welcome to Mystery of the Soul. I'm your co-host, Erin, and I am joined by Leo, who's a psychic medium. Our podcast explores the depths of the soul, the spiritual, and the supernatural.
Hey, Erin.
Hi, Leo. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. Hanging in there. We couldn't have Abby join us, unfortunately, today. She
Okay.
is not feeling well. For our listeners, Abby is my sister, and we built this podcast with her with the intention of having her join us, right? But she doesn't always feel so great. She is a cancer survivor, an oral cancer survivor, and sometimes just the residual pain from the surgery she's had and the chemo and the radiation she's had just makes it difficult for her to talk. So we're going to do this one, you and I, today.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to talk about awakening souls. Are you excited?
Ready.
Okay. For listeners, Leo is actually very excited. This is going to be a fun one. We have a couple of episodes lined up where we're going to talk about the soul, the progression of the soul, what happens with the soul, and we'll get into some of the in-depth stuff later on in some of the other episodes. But today we're going to start the soul conversation with what is an awakening soul, because we feel like this is the easiest place to start when it comes to like defining a soul and getting familiar with what's happening. So Leo, why don't
Yes. I'm going to jump in here.
Yeah, you're going to define what a awakening soul is?
So when I met you with Abby, I kind of recognized you were an awakening soul. And so what that means, or my interpretation of it, is when our souls are planning to come to Earth to be born, there is some master plan. And when we're born here physically on Earth, we sort of develop an amnesia. We don't remember what that plan is. And a lot of times what happens is either a little later on in life or much later in life, we might go through some experiences that kind of shock our system and kind of loosen and kind of gives us kind of a crack to our soul to kind of see the light and start to see things from a different perspective and realize like there's more out there. And so hence like the awakening soul to, what else is out there, like, is a big question. And then, there's all kinds of different avenues that people go down when they awaken.
Yeah. And it's different from someone like you because you were intuitive as a child. So you sort of always knew that there was something going on, right?
Yeah,
but I didn't.
As a kid, like I wasn't a psychic medium as a kid.
Yeah.
I was a very sensitive child. I was very aware of like energies around me. So I felt things very strongly. But it wasn't until later on in my adult life that I went through some experiences that kind of woke me up.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think at some point you would have called yourself an awakening soul too, even though you were born like very intuitive? Or is that more for people like me who were not born intuitive?
I think when it got to the point when I went through my experiences, which I'll share eventually here, maybe tonight.
Yeah.
But looking back, I can see I was like an awakening soul. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And you would describe me as an awakening soul, right?
Definitely an awakening soul. Yes.
I think I sort of rejected that the first time you told me that, didn't I?
You did.
I was
because
uncomfortable with it.
when we were talking about the podcast and we were talking about introducing ourselves,
Yeah.
me as a psychic medium, Abby as a psychic medium,
Mm-hmm.
and you were like, "Oh, I'm her sister Erin." Well, I said, "Yes, but you're also an awakening soul."
Yeah, it took you had to work on me a little bit to get me to be okay with that. But it's true. Like we can talk a little bit, I'm sure in this episode too, about what's been happening to me lately because it's probably a good illustration of what an awakening soul is. But yeah. Okay. So so now we've talked about what we define an awakening soul as, like what happens when people start to realize, like, right? So now they're at their point in their life. I'm a good example. They've been going through life. They're like, oh, it's great, it's fine. And then all of a sudden they're like, holy cow, there's something else there. And there's something else really magical and meaningful and special there. And they're awakening. Their eyes are opening up to this.
Can I jump in
What is
here?
yeah, what's that experience like?
So what I was gonna refer back to you for a second because you actually have a really good example. But when that awakening happens, there's a shift that happens,
Yeah.
and you have an example in corporate America when you
Oh
had that
yeah.
shift happening.
Yeah. Yeah. You want me to talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, so for listeners, I have a full-time job. I am in communications, and I worked for a long time in New York City for a big bank, and that job was super stressful, super stressful. And then COVID happened, and like COVID did, right? It made everything more real and more truthful and revealed a lot of things. And I was burnt out. I was burnt out at that job. It was at the point where I was working remotely, but I would cry. I would just have these deep, painful crying spells like 5 times a day. And I remember I went out to dinner. So this was a couple of months before I left that job. Was having dinner at a friend's house. It was like a dinner party, a couple other people there. And one of my friends said to me, like, "Oh, Erin, how's your job?" And I burst out into tears in the middle of dinner with with people with whom I didn't want to cry in front of, but it was just ingrained. It was so obvious there was something wrong and
Hmm.
this wasn't a fit. And eventually I had a conversation with my boss and we agreed. It took him a little bit of time to get on board with it, but we agreed that this wasn't a fit for me and I left that job. And my life has changed considerably ever since that happened. I got a new job. I work remotely now. I live in a very rural area. I have horses that I get to see every day now because of that shift. And it's just made my life a lot more peaceful. And I'm not crying 5 times a day. That was pretty substantial. And I don't think that that was an accident. That it was so uncomfortable for me that I had to change. That was not an accident.
It was like on a soul level that it was just so uncomfortable to be there any longer.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And so that's what I would say to people is like sometimes that's what it feels like when you start awakening or you're getting a nudge from the other side from spirit. It's like um I'm getting the tingles now, which is
Yeah.
usually
Yep.
sometimes a sign that right what I'm saying is correct and they like to
Hmm.
affirm it. That situation was not in my best interest, right? Like I wasn't going to grow as a person and reach what's up for my highest self in that scenario. But because I'm a little stubborn, they had to be like, we're going to make this really uncomfortable so she gets herself out of it. And I'm so glad that that happened. And so I'd say to other people, sometimes that's the case. Like, think about the situation that you're in and how you feel in it. And does it feel good or does it not feel good?
And was there anything that validated for you that it was the right decision?
You know, so for our listeners, my sister Abby is a psychic medium, and it's helpful to have psychic medium as a sister, particularly when you're going through a life crisis, right? But so two things. One, I felt in my soul like this was the right thing to do, like in my gut. I remember a lot of people were like, "Oh my gosh, like you have this big nice job at this like big bank and how are you just walking away from it and not and I got that a couple times and every time I got it I just felt in my gut like yeah, it's not for me. It's not for me anymore. And I was very calm and okay with it. And I remember telling Abby how calm I felt about it. And she said something along the lines of, well, duh, you're supposed to. This is right for you. You're supposed to feel calm when it's right for you. And so yeah, that's how I felt.
And so
Ultimately it was good.
my guides are talking right now, and so they're
Oh
telling
yeah.
me, yeah, so they're telling me it was kind of like your soul outgrew that life experience.
Yes. And I'm glad thank you for saying that because it's also an interesting point. It wasn't outgrow is the right word, right? Because there was a point in time in my life where it was the right thing for me and I was growing and I was getting something from it. I just also felt like it was time for me to move on to next. Um, and I've seen a lot of people, I've had a lot of career change in my life and you have too, Leo,
Hmm.
but those moves sometimes they're uncomfortable, but looking back, they've all been I'm okay with all of them. They've all been right.
Well,
So
they
I
can be
think that's,
scary for some people too.
yeah, they can be so scary. Um, but hindsight, I'm like, oh, okay, that was the right thing for me. Yeah.
And so, since you made that change in your life, what are the things that maybe you've been able to enjoy now?
Oh, I'm out in nature all the time. I love being outside. Again, where I am, it's up against a couple national forests and there's like there's a lot of water and rivers out here. And I have horses that I get to see every day almost. And it's wonderful. I couldn't have done that if I'd been commuting in and out of New York City. And New York City listen, I love New York City, but the energy out here is much quieter, much more peaceful. And I get to
Well,
do those things every day.
so my guides are talking again, so they're giving me some new information that I haven't actually shared before because I didn't have it before. But what they're
Uh-huh.
sharing now as you're talking is because of your spiritual growth that's going to happen, you needed to be in such a grounding place.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I think as we get our podcast up and running, this is probably going to be a thing that happens is like you'll get intuitive hits for me that you'll share, but they're hits for me, but I hope that they're also helpful for other people, right? As
Right.
they're going through their life experiences and they're hearing what you and I are talking about,
Yeah.
they can take something from it and be like, "Oh, okay. That's interesting."
There's a reason why you're watching this right now.
Yeah. Yeah, watching or listening to us for
Because
sure.
maybe, maybe someone is experiencing those feelings, those pulls, and going through an awakening, and they don't really know what that is that they're experiencing.
Yeah. I didn't know it at the time that I had no idea that that's right. That was the beginning of my awakening. I just knew I was in a situation that no longer felt like it was right for me. And I'm not normally someone who cries 5 times a day. I think generally speaking, most people aren't crying 5 times a day, right? Like as a normal standard.
Right, right.
So that was something in my gut saying this is not the right situation for you anymore. Yeah. So,
Okay.
um, so I think that's probably a good transition into like, how does it feel, right? When you're going through it and coming out of it, like we talked a little bit about what happens when you realize, but like how it feels. Could we talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so in what way, how it feels?
So for me, let's say I was coming out of that situation
Mm-hmm.
and I could breathe. So
Right.
things I noticed about how I felt was like I was sleeping better.
Ah, yes, right.
I had lost a lot of weight at that job because I wasn't eating much, right? And then I like put weight back on. So I felt more comfortable once I got through that difficult situation. Is that
Mm-hmm.
normal, you think? Well, as normal as
I mean, I
any of
think
this.
like we've talked about it, like when you're on your path, things seem to get better, they seem to flow easier.
Yeah.
Not to say that when you're on your correct path that you don't incur obstacles and very hard life challenges.
Hmm.
Um, but when you do make some changes, I think usually in the immediate thereafter, there's some reprieve
Yeah.
and there's a little bit of relief to kind of validate that, oh, okay, that I think that was the right move.
Right. Yep. Definitely for me, it started to feel a little bit better, for sure. Um, what else, like when we think about
Well, let me ask you a
awakening?
question.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
So we talked about how it was helpful for Abby being your sister and being a
Mm,
psychic medium that was helpful for you just to kind of understand maybe the feelings you were having, etc.
hmm.
And then maybe helping you validate that, oh, these feelings I'm having, I'm not crazy and I am really feeling like something needs to change.
Yeah.
Um, Abby was really supportive for that, but how how has it been for the rest of your family with,
Mm,
your life changes and choices for the reasons that you've made them, I guess?
that's a good question. You know, so I'm going to answer that by going a little bit back for a second because I think
Yep.
that's back in time. So I'm going to go
Mm-hmm.
back in time to when Abby came out to our family as being a
Mm-hmm.
psychic medium. And I was the first person she vocalized this to. And this was years ago now. And she said, some weird stuff's been happening now that I'm like kind of through the cancer thing. And I genuinely think I'm talking to our dead grandmother on a regular basis. And I was like, well, how would you know? We never met her. Like, she died before we were born. And Abby was like, definitely talking to her. She was confident of it, but what she was not confident of was like we don't live in a society where that's a normal thing, right? So she was in her brain trying to reconcile what she knew to be true against like what society teaches us is that's not a thing that happens. And I remember saying to her, you know what, that makes sense. You've had multiple near death experiences in your life because she was sick a lot as a kid. She also has an autoimmune disorder that has caused a lot of wreaked a lot of havoc for her in her life and created a lot of medical challenges. So, and then she suffered cancer in her early 30s. So I was sort of like, yeah, I think that you've been sick so many times. Every time you got really sick in your death, something cracked open and it never
Mm-hmm.
fully closed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and eventually she told my parents, and that took them a while. They love her, right? And they wanted to understand, but once again, we don't live in a world where these kinds of things are always easily received. And I think the only reason we came around was because we had to, because it was like a
Mm-hmm.
member of our family was experiencing a very significant thing. And then the testing came into play. And that went down for a while. And the testing is things like very specific questions. I remember one question Abby got from my mom was like, when we went camping, Florence used to wear a raincoat. What color was it? And Abby would answer all of these questions with like flying colors, very specific. She knew all of them. And eventually, we did, as a family, get to a point where it was, we accepted it, right? It was like the norm for us. But it took years to get to that place. So, for me, when I went through that career change, I said the way I phrased it was like, there is something in my bones that is telling me this is not right for me, and I'm going to listen to that. And I think my parents were like, okay, we've seen enough weird stuff with Abby. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot to this world we don't understand. And sometimes when someone says they know what's right for them in their core, you honor
Mm-hmm.
that for them, right? Or you
Mm-hmm.
honor that with them.
Right.
So they were very supportive of it. But I think that Abby's journey and Abby's coming out, if you will, softened the edges of how my family looks at big life changes like that.
So she kind of blazed the trail for you.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Yeah. Um, but that's a good question because like coming out is hard. I mean, how was it for you, right? As you were going through your soul awakening and having relationships with people, what was that like? In fact, a personal question I'm going to ask, and this is a good
Of
one for our
course.
listeners.
Yeah.
So, Leo is married to a wonderful woman named Robin, and you guys were married when you really cracked open in your spiritual journey. So,
Mm-hmm.
you were super duper awakening. So, talk to us about you and Robin and your individual experience.
Okay. So my story goes back to probably 2011 when we caught back from a trip to Thailand, and it was my first international trip. We had a great time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was going through some weird feeling of like different energies going on. Um, I was just starting to, it felt like to lose touch with reality a little bit. Um,
Mm.
and I started not making sense to the people around me, like Robin, some of our other friends, and I was telling them, I think that, you know, I remember talking about Archangel Michael a little bit
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
and and then I think I had been talking about that I'd been communicating with, I think, spirit at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then things just got like really intense with, I guess, the amount of stuff that was coming through to me. It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of unmanageable. Um,
Yeah.
and so I kind of went through a break where I was just kind of being flooded with all kinds of different stimulation. I feel like from brain chemicals and stuff that was coming in from spirit and just other things in my environment. So I ended
Mm-hmm.
up in the hospital for 3 days, and they ended up putting me on medication. They said they thought it was like a one time psychotic break. They didn't think it would
Mm-hmm.
happen again. Um, so we ended up going or leaving, and the apartment that we were staying in, Robin and um, I actually couldn't stay there any longer because I had some negative energy associated with the place that I'm not going to go right
Mm.
into detail right now with it, but
Yeah.
I just couldn't be in that place. And I actually couldn't even help Robin move. So she literally
Yeah.
had to help find us a new place, a new apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And her and my mother in law actually did most of the moving. And so
Mm-hmm.
we eventually found a two-bedroom place not too far from where we were. And then that's when we decided, because after that break I had, because I sort of was cracked wide open, I was feeling very paranoid and
Mm.
actually a lot of fear that was setting in. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was actually quite frightened a lot. And so
Mm.
when we moved to this new place, um, Robin and I both talked about the possibility of maybe getting a cat or two cats. So we actually ended up getting two cats. and we adopted them from a shelter. And so we kind of joked and we called them our my little guardian cats because they would like sleep at the ends of the bed on either side of our feet. And then for a while, Geronimo, one of our cats, he actually ended up for quite some time, and it it was a little unnerving to Robin, but he actually slept on my pillow with me,
Oh my
like
God.
up near my head.
Ugh.
And so, anyway, months went by, and then July 2012 came, and at that point, I had actually gone off the medication that originally they gave me back in November, December,
Mhm.
and because it was just kind of making me feel like a zombie.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not advocating for going off medication or anything, but that's just what happened. But um, I wasn't medicated, and I was starting to have some of more of those kind of, I guess, disassociating with reality and some delusional thinking going on again. And
Mhm.
I felt like I was connecting with spirit again. And um, it reached a point where Robin was really concerned again. And so some stuff had taken place. And I remember I was in the parking lot at the Barnes and Noble, and she called me. She's like, "Where are you?" I told her. She says, "Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." And I
Mhm.
said, "Okay." She says, "I'm taking you to the hospital."
Mhm.
So she came and got me. Now, I didn't think anything was wrong, and I said, "Can we actually stop for a water?" So I made her
Mhm.
stop at a Dunkin's, and I grabbed a water on the way.
Oh my God, you
And
and Duncan. That's a
yes,
side story for another time. Go ahead.
yes. Um, so we got to the hospital. It took quite a while for me to see somebody, and they had a psychologist evaluate me. They agreed with Robin that there was something up, but they said to her, "Boy, he's pretty smart."
Mm.
And she's like, "He's good at hiding things." It's like, okay. So
Yeah.
anyway, I still didn't think there was a problem, and there was actually a chemical problem,
Yeah.
but I didn't think there was anything a problem. So she gave me an ultimatum. She said, "You either need to admit yourself to be evaluated, or I can't stay in the apartment with you." So I decided, okay, I don't want that to happen. But I said to myself, okay, well, I'll admit myself and I'll prove everybody wrong. So
Mm.
that was my goal.
Yep.
so so I ended up being there for 9 days. I ended up getting a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. It's similar to like a bipolar. So
Yeah.
now I had a diagnosis, and they started me with a therapist after I was discharged, and also with a med doctor to kind of work on getting some medication to kind of regulate things. So
Mhm.
over a few months, maybe 6 months or so, maybe a little longer, they were able to finally get me on a combination of like an antipsychotic, a mood stabilizer, a depression med, an anxiety med, and we
Mhm.
found the right combination of things. And to this day, I know it was the right thing
Yeah.
because it gave me a good baseline to kind of stabilize the chemicals so that I could actually function in society and hold down a job and everything like that. Um,
Mhm.
and, it didn't stop me from doing the stuff I do today. So to kind of keep moving forward with that story, eventually few years later, um, I've been doing massage therapy for about 18 years, and I had learned of Reiki years ago. And massage is a very physical job on your body. So as I'm getting older and been doing it for much longer, I was kind of interested in learning a little bit more about Reiki. But I was also, there was a curiosity, not just because it would kind of help keep my body from being physically demanding from the massage, but I've always, since I was a kid or just throughout my life, I've been very interested in like supernatural energy, different things like that. I've always been drawn to it. So
Yeah.
I decided to look for a teacher. I found a teacher. I'd never had a Reiki session before, so I got my first Reiki session from that teacher. And then I ended up doing my level 1 and level 2 with that teacher. And a lot of times you hear that Reiki actually opens the door for a lot of people's
Yeah.
spirituality. So
Yeah.
what happened is after I got attuned to level 2, it really kind of opened up my chakras and the clair senses. A lot of people have heard of clairvoyance, like clear
Hmm.
seeing, etc. There's other clairs, but a lot of those additional senses that aren't our physical senses, those started to really open up and evolve. And so I had an experience. I was working on a regular massage client, and before the session, I had um, a name come through to me that was kind of repeating in my head like a song that gets stuck in your head, but this
Hmm.
name was Nathan. It kept saying Nathan, Nathan, Nathan. And so this client I was with, I'd been working with them for quite a while, so I was comfortable with them. And I kind of knew in the back of my mind the possibility of some of these senses developing. And I knew the possibility of actually spirit coming through was a possibility.
Hmm.
So I kind of took a shot in the dark and I just said to the client, I said, I have this name and it keeps playing over and over in my head and it won't go away. So I said,
Hmm.
does that any connection to Nathan for you? And they said, well, actually, I had a nephew that was in a car accident a few years ago and died in that, and his name was Nathan. And so that
Yeah.
was like my first experience with kind of connecting with spirit as a medium,
Hmm.
but I didn't really know what to do with it. So it
Yeah.
came through, and she validated that, yeah, that person or that name of that person makes sense. And she's like, are they here? And I'm like, I
Yeah.
think so. And what do they have to say? And I said, I'm not really sure. And I think they just want you to know that they're okay. Now, to kind of fast forward for a second, when I do readings and as I've evolved with doing my mediumship, if
Hmm.
someone asks me a question of like, how are they, or are they with someone, I don't automatically jump to assuming I know the answer. I actually
Yeah.
wait, listen, and I ask spirit to either give me a sign or give me validation. That's something I had to learn through evolving and progressing, but at this
Hmm.
time I didn't know any of that. So but I knew enough not to make stuff up also.
Yeah. And so when you went home that night, did you tell Robin? And how did she
so
react?
so I did share that with Robin, and she did not react really well. It was very
Yeah.
triggering for her because of
Yeah.
what we had already gone through with me. And she was, like probably a lot of people, she was worried that I was getting sick again.
Yeah.
And so that was
Yeah.
kind of a worry for her. And I wasn't sure myself, but I also felt like, a really strong pull that it was real.
Hmm.
And so I was in therapy at the time, and so I told her that I'm going to tell my therapist about it. And I said, I feel like it was legitimate, but I'm going to be cautious about it and how
Hmm.
I kind of move forward with it because I want to this time not be the way I was when I was unmedicated and sick and hiding everything. This
Hmm.
time, I wanted to kind of be open and honest and forthright about what was happening so that I could, one, make sure like it's legit and getting validated and I'm not losing touch with reality again. So I kind of
Yeah.
shared that with my therapist, and eventually, you know, months, weeks, months, year later, things just kind of progressed into Beyond Names, where I was getting information about things that would kind of remind people of the people that I was connecting to in spirit. They would
Hmm.
talk about memories. They would talk about, um, could be favorite songs. They would talk about things in, like the person that I was working with. They would talk about things that were going on in their lives also, that
Yeah.
I didn't know about also. And so
Hmm.
while all this was happening, I was getting validations that, they weren't looking at me like you're crazy and stop talking, but they were
Hmm.
actually saying, wow, that makes sense. And oh my God, I can't believe you just said that. And
Yeah.
so, so that was like the beginning part of my development. And so, one thing that I did to kind of sort of, I guess, keep track of the situation and how it was evolving, to make sure that I was still staying here in reality and grounded, even while I was like still connecting with spirit, I would
Hmm.
journal my readings, and so that I could actually have those to look back on,
Yeah.
to see, oh wow, this came up, and they validated this and that and that. And so, like, I shared these experiences with Robin. I shared the
Hmm.
experiences with my therapist, and we
Hmm.
just kind of continued to kind of share things. And eventually, you know, things just kept moving forward. Um, I
Like
look back.
people were okay with it. Like they were
It
like,
it took a while for Robin to get on board,
yeah.
um, but fast forward, you know, back in 2020, when I was really doing some, I had actually publicly come out as a medium, and I was actually doing free group readings over Zoom. Robin was actually helping me check
Oh.
people in, and she was actually listening to me work and do the
Oh
readings.
yeah. I love that.
So that was kind of
So
fun.
that's such a good story. I love that. And I appreciate how much you shared about that journey with Robin. There is one thing, we talk about this in our first episode, but I think it's worth taking a quick like diversion to hit on
Yep.
too, which is mental
Hmm.
health, right?
Yeah, right. Good.
And you and Abby have a similar story in that both of you had health crises that sort of opened up what was already there. So you are both
Hmm.
intuitive people, intuitive children who went through a health crisis and that like
Hmm.
cracked it open.
Right.
You know, the advantage Abby had was that her illness was physical.
Hmm.
So people could see it and appreciate it, and it was very real and immediate for them.
Right.
And the challenge we have in society today with mental health is that it's not visible, right? And
Right.
so it's
Right.
makes it very intangible for people to appreciate or empathize with, but it is a very real thing, right? Like you took all of the health steps you could to take care of yourself. And you had very similar journey to what someone has when they have a physical crisis, right? They go to the doctor,
Right.
they see a couple of different doctors, they go
Right.
back and forth. But on our podcast, and we've talked about this before, we want our listeners to know that we take mental health very, very seriously. And we want to be as respectful as we can about those challenges that exist, and that we know that mental health challenges are real, right? They're invisible in that you can't see them or other people can't see them. That doesn't make them not real. I
Yeah.
just
And
think
I'm,
it's an important note.
yeah, I think so too. And I'm a big advocate for not only medication being Western medicine,
Mm-hmm.
but Western medicine can complement Eastern medicine modalities as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in the spiritual community that are afraid of or don't want like the Western medication because they don't want either side effects or what
Yeah.
people have or society has talked about what it does to your body or whatever. So it's very stigmatized about one having a diagnosis, but then
Mm-hmm.
also being on medication. And I can tell you that you know I've been. It was funny. Robin and I were in a bookstore yesterday, and we were talking about like someone being compliant with meds, and she
Mm-hmm.
actually said, "I don't like that word." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, it's kind of like someone's telling you to do something." And
Mm.
she said, "I actually like adhering to better."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense." So
Mm-hmm.
so I can say like I'm a big advocate for adhering to taking your medication. I'm a big fan of therapy. I've been doing therapy for years.
Mm-hmm.
And when I had my mental health crisis that November of 2011, right before Thanksgiving, Robin had her first therapy session with her therapist, who
Mm.
she continues to be with since 2011.
Yeah, we're very therapy friendly here in this
Yes,
crew. Yes.
right, right.
Don't you
And
have
the
a doc? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like the only and best way to kind of break down the stigma is actually talking about it.
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah. So thank you for going there. Don't you have a doctor who's got a family member who's also a psychic medium? Can you tell me that?
Oh, I know. So the story is one of my med doctors, not the one I have now, but
Okay.
a few med doctors ago, I was in the process of my original med doctor was retiring, so
Mm-hmm.
I had to find a new med doctor, and so we found this new med doctor, and when she was, going through the intake process and we were chatting, I told her I was a psychic medium and stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
she was like, "Wow, really?" I said, "Yeah." And she says, "That's so funny." She says, "My mom and brother are psychic mediums."
I love this.
I like, "Really?
Yes.
Okay." And then the next question she asked me, she's like, "Does the medication interfere with your process?"
It's such a scientific question.
And and I said, "Actually, no."
That's delightful.
Yeah.
Um, okay, let's talk about, before we close out this section, let's talk about signs that you're an awakening soul. Like, what
Okay.
kind of signs pop up for people that say, like, hey, the light bulb's on. What's happening in your life now?
Well, I know for me and I know for you too, this has been happening a lot, but seeing those sequential numbers
Oh my gosh,
or
Leo,
the
we see
angel
them.
numbers.
Okay, so let's explain to our listeners what angel numbers are. I'm going to put that on you.
Oh, okay. So these sequential numbers that in probably those of you who are watching right now probably know what I'm going to say, but
Mm,
when you see 1111 or 111 or 555 or 333, all those have a significance, but
mhm,
you know, the thing that I learned about a lot of the sequential numbers and the angel numbers is if you think about right after you see that number, think about what you had just been thinking about, or what you had just been talking
mm,
about, or what's just been on your mind recently. And it's your angels and guides' way of saying either, yes, you're on the right track, or we're here supporting you, or this makes sense, keep moving forward, kind of thing. All
mhm.
these sequential numbers, you can Google and look up angel numbers, and you can find all kinds of interpretations from people about them. And you don't really have to know exactly what every single number means. Just know that you do have support.
Mhm. Yep. that's definitely it. So I'm going to try and think for myself, like signs that I kind of knew I was an awakening. And again, I'm a little bit of a cheat because my sister, who would also just call my best friend, like we talk all of the time, is a psychic medium. So like, I didn't have to rely on signs so much as I could just text my sister. But definitely I would say things that are right for me were just flowing. Um, like they weren't met with resistance, so leaving that old job, I took a break between that job and the current one I have now. Um, and getting that new job was like a smooth process, I'd say. So the idea of things flowing without a lot of resistance is, and then an awakening soul recognizes that flow. That's the difference, right? So you might still have that flow and not sort of be particularly spiritual, but when you're spiritual and you're like light bulb starting to go off, you recognize that the flow is an indicator that you might be going in the right direction.
You kind of have an epiphany.
Yeah. And you understand why. That's like the
Mm-hmm.
thing. The synchronicity and the numbers, the angel numbers, that's a big thing. I would say another thing awakening souls get is they stop believing in coincidences, or they stop
Right. Good
attributing
point.
everything to a coincidence, right? An awakening soul says, this thing happening for this reason isn't random, and they're making those connections.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Um, what other signs would we want to kind of note for an awakening soul? Dreams. Do you think
Yep.
some dreams might be more vivid or clear for them?
Yeah, I think sometimes people have dreams and they remember bits and pieces of them that might be significant, like to give them a clue that either they're maybe on the right track or they've been really having a hard time thinking about what to do next, and something might come up in their dream that kind of gives them maybe an idea of like what direction to go or something like that.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But to go back to the coincidences and synchronicities, do we want to talk about or save it about kind of like how we met?
Yeah, so for our listeners, we talked about that a little bit in the first episode. But let's talk about it a little bit
Like
now
briefly,
too.
yeah.
Yeah. I'll start. How's
Go
that?
ahead.
So
Yep.
my sister Abby, who I probably don't have to keep calling her my sister Abby. I can probably just call her Abby at this point. But Abby was at a point in her spirituality where her her psychic door was wide open and she could read anything and anyone, and she hadn't figured out what boundaries were like. And it's just like we need sleep at night, right? We quiet, we get rest, or we need boundaries in anywhere else in our life. Abby didn't have healthy boundaries for this gift that had been bestowed upon her, and she quite hadn't figured out how to build them. So she knew she needed a mentor or someone to help her. I had mentioned to a friend of mine that my sister had this newly emerging spiritual awakening, was a psychic medium. This friend mentioned my sister to another one of her friends, and that friend of a friend happened to have been a client of yours and really a family friend of yours, Leo. Oh, no, friend of Robin's, right?
No, as a friend of Robin's.
Okay. Anyway, the point is, I'm trying to synthesize this. Not doing a good job. The point is, what Abby really needed was a mentor, and the other side, through like three people deep, found her mentor, the friend of a friend of a friend, right? And this random text
Mm-hmm.
message came into me one night that was like, hey, your sister might really benefit from meeting this guy named Leo. He's also a psychic medium. And I passed that over to Abby, and lo and behold, she met you. And the most
Mm-hmm.
remarkable thing Abby said about meeting you, Leo, was that she realized instantly you were picked for her, that
Mm.
her guides had found the right person who could empathize enough with her scenario and could help solve some of her problems, and they found you. And that
Mm-hmm.
has proven to be very true. So none of that was like you could sort of pass it off as a coincidence, right? A friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, we all kind of knew that was baloney. It was very purposeful.
Yeah. I mean, there's only so many coincidences you can have before you can say, okay,
Right. Right.
right.
Right. And so people who are spiritual and are paying attention to this don't call those kinds of things coincidences. We, even people like me who don't have access to talking full time with spirit guides, right? We know how things work out sometimes is not random or just because. It's very specific. It's because our guides have been helping.
Right.
Yeah.
Synchronicities.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. Okay, so before we move on to our final segment, where we feed the soul, I want to make sure we just wrap up with how we've defined an awakening soul. So I'm going to try and repeat what you defined at the beginning, at the top of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
can use that to sort of close us out. Okay, so an awakening soul is someone. So the first assumption is that there are commitments, obligations we've made before coming here about our purpose, right? An awakening soul is someone who's starting to realize a few things. One, that there is another side, right? That there is things like life after death. There is like a big spirit, universe, God, what you want to call it. They're seeing that and recognizing that that might be true. And they're starting to figure out that they might have a specific purpose here on Earth in this lifetime. And they're starting to explore what that might look like. But they're in the early stages of it. And then after sort of that recognition, there are going to be a bunch of things that they might have to think through, like how will my friends and family react? What kind of signs can I start looking for? What's going to change in my life, right? Those things start occurring after their eyes have kind of opened a little bit. What do you think? Is that about right?
Yeah.
Would you correct
Yeah.
me?
No, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you, listener, are an awakening soul, you've come to the right place because we're going to be talking about a lot of things supernatural, spiritual, spirit related, psychic medium wisdom.
And more things about the soul.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, and then, right, we have a number of other podcasts specific to soul growth. Um, okay, so we've been talking for a while. I thought, Leo, maybe what we
Yeah.
could do is transition to feed the soul.
Yeah, I have something in mind.
Okay. Where
So,
were you going to take us today?
so where I'm going to take you actually is, I don't know if I'll call it a quote or just a saying you've probably heard before, but we have two eyes, two ears, and one mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we should listen twice as much as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that. It kind of came to me today when I was working with a friend, and it was something that my guides kind of like brought up for me to kind of relay the message to her. And it wasn't not only pertaining to, like, let's say when you're talking with your friend, but also when you're, let's say, trying to connect with your intuition or trying to connect with your spirit team,
Mm-hmm.
rather than try to guess or figure out what is happening or what they're saying, more so quiet yourself and listen more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you do, you'll probably hear what you're supposed to hear.
I love it. Because it's not just other people you're listening to, right?
No,
There's greater, bigger wisdom out there to listen to.
true.
I love that, Leo. That's awesome.
All right.
All right. So Listeners, I think that's it for us today, but we're going to be back with more episodes talking about the soul and soul experiences. Thanks so much for joining us. We are Mystery of the Soul, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.